I'm Elisabeth Buchan. I'm a research intern here at ASPI, and I'm joined today by Ash Collingburn, a visiting fellow at ASPI's Counter-Terrorism Policy Centre. Today we're revisiting the Bastille Day attack and its implications for Australia's approach to counter-terrorism. Ash, you and the C team here at ASPI recently published a CT Quick Look paper on this subject. What was the purpose of the publication and what's unique about it?
So the name says it all really, CT Quick Look. What it is a brief report that covers a terrorist attack or counter-terrorist actions. And the intent of the report is that it is a concise report that says a lot in only a few pages. So it's fairly simple language, it gets to the point, and it's broken down into three parts. So what, so what, and now what. And the what really covers the facts, who, what, where, when, why, and how. And then the so what is looking at the takeaways from that event. What are the lessons that can be learned from that attack, such as the Bastille Day attack in Nice? And then the now what is looking at how those lessons apply to Australia and our counter-terrorism arrangements. So in the counter-terrorism space, we need to be agile and we need to be adaptive. And I think the CT report is ASPI's contribution to that process.
Yeah. So today we'll be fleshing out some of those now whats of the report. This was the third mass casualty terrorist attack in France in 18 months. So what aspects of France's CT strategies aren't working?
Yeah, so French authorities have learned a lot of hard lessons over the past 18 months. After the November Paris attacks last year, they commissioned a parliamentary inquiry, and the findings of that were released, in fact, just days or a week or so prior to the Nice attack. And the key finding was that the security agencies and the intelligence agencies are not working all that effectively together. They're not effectively sharing information or intelligence. So the report recommends that they actually bring all of those security and intelligence agencies under one counter-terrorism umbrella, and also that they give their law enforcement agencies greater powers of search and arrest. Right,
so there's been a lot of discussion in Australia recently about possibly an increased role of the ADF in domestic security relating to counter-terrorism, and the Quick Look actually recommends reviewing this role. So what kind of function do you envision for the ADF, and how would it cross over with civilian responses?
So the Australian Defence Force is currently conducting a holistic review of its role in counter-terrorism. So I won't steal their thunder, I won't talk to that so much as saying that here in Australia for domestic counter-terrorism, the state and territory law enforcement agencies, they have primacy. Now, the Defence Act of 1903 and our Constitution says that the ADF can be called out to support those states and territory in extremis, and that's done through the federal government. So there is an arrangement there to make that happen, and that's predominantly occurs when the use of lethal force is required, or when niche ADF capabilities such as chemical, biological, radiological capabilities are required in response to an incident. Right now, the ADF's role is really offshore. So if we think about the counter-terrorism space as a layered approach to national security, we think about the ADF's raison d'etre is to fight the nation's wars. And right now, they are contributing to our counter-terrorism efforts by fighting the Islamic State in its so-called caliphate. So to deny safe havens, to prevent those training areas, or to neutralise that terrorist breeding ground. So they're working deep in the Middle East. They're also working close in the Southeast Asian region with other agencies and working with our partners there to counter terrorism in the region. And then back at home, as I said, our law enforcement agencies have primacy, but the ADF still has a role to play.
Yeah. But if their role is this in extremis sort of role, I mean, there's going to be a fair bit of a delay, I suppose, in the time that you actually put those processes in motion before you get the ADF becoming involved. I mean, is that going to be a problem, do you think, for our domestic security? When we look at things like the Bastille Day attack, you know, it sort of blindsided authorities. You know, this stuff happens very fast. Is the ADF going to have that capacity to come in and assist, or is it going to very much remain sort of a policing role?
It's one of the issues with terrorism, and we saw this in Nice. Nice is France's 5th largest city, so it's almost a regional centre. But so the first responders in that case were not those high readiness, specially trained counter-terrorism forces, which is why that truck in Nice was able to travel 2 kilometres before it was stopped. Because the first responders were municipal police who were armed with sidearms, which were unable to prevent that truck. So it was only when national police were on the scene to be able to stop the truck using heavier calibre weapons.
And has Australia responded to that in terms of bolstering the capacity of regional forces?
So it's a capacity thing, and one of the things that we have recommended in the Quick Look is that our law enforcement agencies need to work with all other first responders, so ambulance and fire, to rehearse these type of responses to events and ensure that they do have the training and the systems to help prevent something like that occurring. Of course, you can't be prepared for every scenario all the time. So you have to weigh your effort where you think the greatest risk is.
Sure. The publication actually draws an interesting parallel between France and Australia in terms of both countries having quite strict gun laws. Obviously, the Bastille attack was done mostly with a vehicle, but he had also obtained firearms, and 2015 attacks in France had also involved firearms. So are Australia's arms regulations strong enough to protect us from this kind of terrorist attack with a firearm, for instance, or do you focus more on other methods such as the improvised bombs or bladed weapons?
Yeah, our gun laws are appropriate.
Yeah.
And I think it's important to remember in Nice there were a number of weapons in the truck, but most of those weapons were replicas, including a replica grenade. So only his sidearm, his pistol, was actually a real weapon. The thing to note here is that a terrorist with intent will find a way to execute. And it doesn't matter whether it's a gun, a rifle or a pistol, or whether it's a knife, as in the Minto stabbing a couple of weeks ago, or if it's a homemade bomb, a pressure cooker bomb or a pipe bomb, as we saw in the New York and Jersey Shore attacks 2 weekends ago. So again, it comes back to preparing our law enforcement agencies to deal with a whole range of different scenarios. And although they may not be equipped to deal with everything, as long as they have considered the types of attacks that may occur and how they would respond to those, that's important.
Yeah. And the attacker in Nice had been involved in the criminal justice system before, so he was known to French officials, and it's not unusual for those responsible for terrorist attacks to actually be on the radar of authorities. So, I mean, how effective is our intelligence sharing if authorities can't act on that information? And how do you draw the line between civil liberties and national security in that respect?
So, in the case of Nice, the attacker, and in fact in many recent terrorist attacks in the West, the attackers have had a criminal history, but it hasn't met the threshold to be on a terror watch list.
Right.
So the Australian intelligence community and our law enforcement agencies only have so much bandwidth or so much capacity. So they apportion that where they think that their greatest priorities are or where the most risk is. And they're not going to watch somebody who has committed criminal offences in the past if they haven't been radicalised or they don't know, aren't known to have been radicalised.
Right, yeah.
So the attacker in Nice, he had a criminal history, but he was not known to have been radicalised. He wasn't particularly religious. His mobile phone demonstrated demonstrated that he was on dating websites and the like.
Yeah.
So, there really is a fine line. There needs to be a balance. So our counter-terrorism resources, a large chunk of that goes into prevention, and part of that is detection, so surveillance.
Yeah.
And our intelligence community looks at high-risk people or people with a particular background or profile that meet that threshold for surveillance. But a large part of it is actually through these so-called countering violent extremism programs, where our government, I think, has been really effective in focusing on minority communities to build that social cohesion and community resilience.
Okay. And is there more, do you think, that we could be doing in that area across the national and across the state level?
Yeah, so I think at the moment there are a lot of good programs out there, but they are somewhat disconnected, and I think we need to be better at measuring their effectiveness so that we actually know that we're getting good value for money, and we need to connect those efforts at the community into our broader counter-terrorism efforts.
Well, thank you very much for your time, Ash, and thank you for listening. The Bastille Attack Quick Look is available for free on ASPI's website, and our CT group will continue to publish these Quick Look reports after significant events.
Thank you, Liz. ASPI's Counter-Terrorism Policy Centre will be publishing 2 new Quick Look reports in the next 24 hours. One will cover the Minto stabbing here in Australia, and the second will cover the recent attacks in New York and New Jersey in the United States 2 weekends ago.
Great. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you.